Morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here this morning. We are about to resume proceedings within Finance Committee, and before we do, I would ask the Honorable Deputy Premier to lead us in prayer this morning, and following his prayer, then I will again grant permission for the Premier to make a brief statement concerning what the government has been doing with respect to the rains and the local flooding. Thank you.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege of being together here today in Finance Committee. Father, we thank you for the many blessings that you've given the Cayman Islands, and we ask you to continue to bless our three precious islands. Father, be with Minister Archer today as he leads us in Finance Committee. We ask you to be with each one of us that are here. Lead us, guide us, and direct us that we will do your will for our islands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. You all may be seated. Premier.
Mr. Chairman, good morning, and thank you for granting permission for me to just briefly outline what the situation is with respect to weather as best we know. Following on from yesterday's announcement of the forecast, Grand Cayman received almost 10 inches of rain between 7 a.m. on June 2nd and 1 p.m. yesterday afternoon. The current forecast shows that the sister islands can expect heavy rains over the next 24 to 48 hours. In Grand Cayman, it is forecast that we will receive 1 to 2 inches more rain over the next 24-hour period. All government offices and schools are open, and I should say government schools are open, although I understand a number of private schools are closed because of the aftermath of the flooding yesterday. Over the last 24 hours, our emergency services have been working hard to serve the community. As an example, on an average day, EMS, police, and fire are called 4 to 4 times. Yesterday, they received 93 calls for service, ranging from home evacuation assistance to motor vehicle accidents. Whilst government shelters in East End and North Side were opened yesterday, they were later closed due to lack of need by the community. Community emergency response teams in Bordentown and West Bay provided materials and support to a number of persons and families who were in need as a result of the inclement weather. Hazard management continues to monitor the conditions and will continue to coordinate government's response if necessary. Persons are encouraged to call 911 in the event of an emergency, or hazard management at 945-4624 for non-emergencies or to report hazards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Premier. We will now continue with our deliberations with respect to the appropriations this morning for the Cabinet Office, falling under the Premier. Our first output for the Cabinet Office is CBO 1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy, $1,743,098 Cayman Islands dollars, found on page 44 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Page 44. If there are no questions, then I'll proceed to take. You have a question, Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, you have an increase in the budget of more than 100%. Can they explain is this to do with the COS? Is this to do with salaries? Is the increase in the budget?
No, Mr. Chairman, this is to do principally with the e-government initiative.
Are there any further questions, Mr. Bush? Okay, Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chairman, I do apologize. I didn't realize e-government was coming under here. Mr. Chairman, in light of what was revealed here yesterday about the lack of backup and redundancy in our system, I wonder if it goes any further to extend on to, let me ask it this way. How comfortable are we with the security of our computer system?
Mr. Chairman, we have the Director of e-government here. Perhaps it might be better if he tried to address that than for me to do so.
Good morning. Through you, Mr. Chair. This is Ian Tibbetts, Director of E-Government in the Cabinet Office. To answer the member's question, we do have concerns about the security that is there today. However, the security is a key focus, and I've been working with the computer services team around their strategy for addressing security. And just a recent time, there's been some procurement for systems to improve the security. While security is a holistic culture approach that needs to be implemented, the start is there. A strategy is being worked on, and certainly from the e-government perspective, we recognize that whatever we do can only be in sync with what is secure and safe. So, we've looked at a variety of options, whether it be to obviously address the security of the systems within our control, but also to what options we have, whether we create a standalone network to offer some of these services, and looking at other countries that have e-government solutions and how they've addressed the security approach. Similarly, working with the managing director of the ICTA and the ICTA team on their cybersecurity program. As a matter of fact, we have a roundtable discussion next week at which he and I will be working together on as well.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. Mr. McLean?
And Mr. Chairman, I know I need to approach this like I'm walking on eggshells. And I understand that, sir. I really understand that. But I'm not very comfortable with the answer the gentleman gave. That's personal. It doesn't all go well for the integrity of a country system. His answer.
Mr. Chairman, I know that Mr. McLean understands exactly the reasons for the answer being expressed in the way it is. What we can say to the member is, if he wants more information about what government is actually doing to address the issues, we can do so offline, in camera.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bush, yes, sir?
Mr. Tibbetts did say that government is addressing the deficit in the system in regards to what we were discussing yesterday. He did say that, right? They are addressing it.
Are there
And
any,
when that time comes, if that is something that the government can share with members here, I certainly would appreciate knowing the steps that are being taken.
We're happy to give that briefing.
thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, we'll proceed to the vote. So, all those in favor of CBO 1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy for $1,743,098, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. CBO 2, Cabinet and National Security Council Support and Servicing, $660,665 on page 45, page 45. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, we'll proceed to vote. So those in favor of CBO 2, Cabinet and National Security Council Support and Servicing for $660,665, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. CBO 9, Protocol Services, $582,311 on page 46. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to know if we are still going along with the same amount of staff we had in protocol, and if it's satisfactory, and if we got an actor, somebody acting again.
Mr. Chairman, I'll ask the Cabinet Secretary to address that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Samuel Rose, the Cabinet Secretary. If I may answer the member's question, Mr. Chair, the protocol office is headed by the protocol coordinator. A few years ago, the position of chief of protocol was made redundant, and so now the head of the department is the protocol coordinator, and that's Ms. Melanie Sims. We do have in this budget a post of protocol assistant, as obviously there are additional things that we've been wanting to do, such as training, support for the various protocol services that are delivered. We obviously have basically one officer who's dedicated mainly at the airport to assist with individuals, so that leaves only Ms. Sims. And we have a number of staff who will volunteer from time to time to assist, but the time has come for a protocol assistant. So we do have that budgeted for in this year's budget, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I wonder why that nomenclature was removed from our structure of head of protocol, director of protocol, or whatever, because every country you go into, that is a nomenclature that spans the breadth of the world.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that decision would have obviously predated me. That's how I came and found it. But I mean, that's something we can look at if you do believe then that it would be more on par with your other Caribbean Commonwealth countries and CARICOM nations. That's something we can look at just to remove any potential confusion and so that any visiting delegations or dignitaries will know then that this individual is the head of protocol. I'm sure that we can consider that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, it brings legitimacy and consistency to us as a country. You remember the leader of government business, how stupid that was? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of CBO 9, Protocol Services, $582,665, $311, standing part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination, $109,346. On page 47, page 47, are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think it was 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, the House went through a committee process of revision that may be necessary for the Freedom of Information law. I wonder if we can have an update on when those amendments that that committee recommended are likely to come forward.
Mr. Chairman, the redrafting and so forth is at a very advanced stage, and other issues have arisen since that exercise by the committee, and those concerns and considerations have been taken into account in redrafting or in drafting the amendments to the bill. So I am very hopeful that we will get the bill to caucus and to cabinet within the next month, 6 weeks. And that we will be able to get the amendments passed by, I'd say, by Christmas.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, another concern I have is that there seems to be a growing resistance in responses to FIA applications almost across government. Is there anything likely to be done in amending the law to increase the authority of the FOI commissioner? And one of the things that I find in FOI application is that the average civil servant, because the law and the regulation says that they have to respond within 30 days, you don't normally get a reply until 29 and a half days. And oftentimes as they ask for an extension. I mean, I'm sitting on a particular FOI application now that was sent in October last year and still haven't gotten the responses. So they, my concern is that there seems to be a growing resistance to responses in FOI, and I don't know what we can do about it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I've sat on both sides of this, and I think a big part of the problem is that the FOI system is being, I hate to say abused, but that's what's happening. The sheer number of sort of Mickey Mouse FOI requests that are being submitted creates such a burden on the system and on the people who have to do it that what I will call legitimate FOI requests are often not dealt with as expeditiously as they should be. And I think the amendments that are being looked at, you know, you have to look at all of these things, because when the sheer volume of work and expense that is involved in answering questions gets too great, what you see happening now is what happens. The system starts to grind slowly, more slowly and more slowly and more slowly. So we have to look at all of these things, and I think there'll be room for considerable discussion and debate when the bill actually comes down here. Or actually when we publish it, the amending bill.
Mr. Chairman, what a difference a day makes.
Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I hear the premiers talk about these intricacies that causes some delays. But certainly, Mr. Chairman, when a situation is occurring it cannot take anyone that long to produce information that is by virtue of emails? Or is this a reflection of the corrupt computer system? Because especially because it's personal information and they get permission from the other individual, permission is readily granted, and it takes 2 months still, 3 months, and it's not made available. What is being done about that?
Mr. Premier?
Mr. Chairman, that just comes back to the point I made. If all the officer had to deal with was 1 or 2, but when they have 40 or 50 to deal with over the course of a month, then things get slowed down because there's only so much in terms of resources that can be devoted to dealing with FOI, which quite frankly and realistically is an unproductive, from a country standpoint, is an unproductive use of time. It's part of the transparency process, but it doesn't achieve anything as far as the government is,
Deliver
or
services.
the delivery of services is concerned.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, one more question on this and then we...
Mr. Chairman, we're not talking about a 30-day delay and then a request for another 30 days. That was the last part of it. We're talking about 8 months requesting the same information that was done, correspondence that was done through emails. And I appreciate the Premier saying that these things, they're becoming outdated with them. But why then did you ask permission? Why would you ask permission to release someone's personal information who is not a part of government and they need that? And that's 3 months ago. And you still haven't sent it? It sounds very much to me like someone is trying to hide something.
If there are no further questions, then we will proceed to vote on this appropriation. So all those in favor of CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination, for $109,346, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. And those against, no. CBO 17, Information Services Provided to Other Government Agencies, for $928,448 on page 48. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if this is the right place for it, but the government free TV channel that we got paid $80 a month to see is only available from one supplier. And if you don't happen to have that supplier, you can't get it. Is anything being done to make the government channel available, for instance, on Lime for those constituents who have the Lime box as opposed to, what's it, West Star or some other company now that originally had it? Because it's not free.
Mr. Rose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When Lime TV was launching, we had discussions with Lime about carrying SIG TV on as part of their general package for the Lime TV customers. They decided in the end that they would go ahead and launch and would revisit that. So that's a conversation that we need to now go back on and have with them. But I'm pleased to say that Logic has been actually testing the over-the-air broadcast via UHF of Channel 23. So I think it's now available in several districts. I think most districts. I'm not certain about the eastern districts, but if you have a rabbit ears now, throughout most of the islands you can catch it on Channel 23. So throughout most of Grand Cayman, sorry. So we have not necessarily to answer the last part of your question, we have not necessarily yet figured out how to get it online and to stream it. That would probably require a little bit more, some more equipment, the purchase of additional equipment, etc., to stream it online on a daily basis. But we may be very close to getting it broadcast over the air for free to no non-paying customers. Then
Through you, Mr. Chairman, well,
Mr. Miller,
I hope that if the government is negotiating that, they're doing something about putting up some kind of, I don't know whether it's a repeater or something to strengthen the signal, because the old West Star free signal in Northside was so bad that they eventually took down what they had up on the antenna. So you got to be careful, because there are people that lives out in Northside and East End that would like to watch the government TV channel.
thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, a year ago in Finance Committee, we discussed on the government channel the possibility of them posting is it a menu or a schedule of events to come? And we were promised that that was what could be done. But I'm not seeing it being done. Maybe I'm between it or something. But can they give us an update on it, please?
Gentlemen, if I could just avoid a crosstalk. Mr. Rose?
thank you, Mr. Chair. I must apologize, as yes, we did seek to come back this year with an update confirming that we did have a regular schedule posted. Unfortunately, the times of some of the shows are quite irregular, so it's kind of difficult to have a advanced menu providing specific times of when each show is going to be broadcast. Now, I do believe we can look at doing it on a daily basis. I think that's something that we can do, but we have a few more consistent shows now. We have the For the Record rebroadcasts. We have, whenever we have the Legislative Assembly, obviously the times will vary back and forth. So that's something that we did not get completed last year, and I apologize for that. So we will look forward to providing something in the very near future, sir.
Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I really don't understand the difficulty, and of sudden I don't know anything about it, but you schedule it, whether it's on a daily basis or a weekly basis, you schedule what you got and put it on. You can always run that, and then if the shows that are irregular and a little longer, you run a what they call it, a streamer. Explain the reason why the other show not come on yet. But there has to be some consistency. People can't just turn on the TV and you don't know what it is. You can plan your future tomorrow, if whatever the case may be. And the other thing is, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we are going to move ahead with this to have its own studio, really develop local content in it, because I see TA coming in soon and they have control over the others, and it's time now to take some decisions on this local content and what local content means. But we need to also lead in that regard as a quote unquote public broadcasting system. I know we have the University College. I don't see any classroom setting things like math or English or something of that nature. And if we are so hung up on education, I think these are little things that we need to do, Mr. Chairman. I see it all the time on other public broadcasting stations where you have basic math they're teaching or something like that. People will sit down in their homes and watch it and learn, you know. And I'm wondering if these are things that we can't look into.
Very good point. Mr. Rose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find nothing objectionable about the member's suggestion, and we are definitely looking to increase the content. And obviously, there are technical issues that go along with that, but I do agree then that providing more educational shows is very important. What we try to do with special conferences, the STEM conference, whatever other conferences the UCCI is putting on, we try to have broadcasts of those keynote speakers or workshops that have been put on by experts in various fields. So we do our best to educate the public, because obviously there's limited seating at these conferences and sometimes people can't attend because of their work schedules or what have you. So, you know, SIG TV is a very important vehicle, and it has a lot of potential, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. So I do hope that we will see bigger and better things in the future that don't necessarily cost a lot of money to put on.
Mr. Chairman, last
Thank you.
question. Sir.
Mr. McLean?
Yes, sir. Upstairs, Radio Cayman was fitted out to be a studio, but we had the Reform or Iris people there. Has that now been cleaned out? Is it now ready to have our own government studio there? And I don't want to hear anything about them other newspapers about you shouldn't get into business. We are in the business. That's our business, to inform our people.
Mr. Rose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CIG TV studios are presently on the second floor of the government admin building. In the press room, we have a media center in the second floor. So as of now, there are no immediate plans to, given the capital expense associated with that, there are no immediate plans to utilize that upstairs space for the television, to relocate the television center to Radio Cayman. That's something we'd have to look at in terms of the cost.
Mr. Chairman, I don't, during my time, it was never, it was never the intent for it to be a, what do you call it, broadcast center, where you have your press conferences. It was never the intent to do that with upstairs Radio Cayman, as I understand it. The intent was that it would be a studio where you would develop, you know, the same interviews and with like, if they're putting on a show, a profile of a department or doing, like I was talking a while ago, like the educational shows or something. I think that was the intent initially. Now, where the press briefing would be, I would think would be at a different place. But that's what I was questioning, if we're going to develop upstairs Radio Cayman to that extent, for those things.
Mr. Chair, just to be perfectly honest, we have no immediate plans for that right now. I mean, we've had no, as you can see, we've had no major increase in the budget for that area. So a lot of the videography we're doing on site, and things like an education program, what have you, would be easily done on site, whether it's at UCCI or whether it's filming a conference or what have you. So, I mean, it's something we can look at for the future, but again, there's just no appropriation for it at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Miller, Mr. Bush indicated he had a question. Mr. Bush?
Separate question, Mr. Miller has a follow-up to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the study that Ian Way did they include Cayman, Radio Cayman in that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And what is the government's position, Mr. Chair?
They recommended the sale of Radio Cayman. We have said categorically that we will not sell it.
No.
Punto final.
Government's response, not doing it.
Not doing it.
Cool. 30 years I stood by that.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Just for my information, Mr. Chairman, there's no income reflected here for Radio Cayman. Is that income reflected somewhere else in one of the other documents? And what is the amount of income that Radio Cayman generates?
No, Radio Cayman is under the Cabinet Office, yeah.
Mr. Premier? Sorry, Mr. Rose, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that would be the Radio Cayman's third output, RC, I think RCY3, which is not, since this revenue is not reflected in the outputs to be delivered, but the amount of revenue that's projected for the 15-16 financial year is 400,000, approximately 400,000 CI.
Mr. Miller?
Next question is what is being done to improve the revenue side if it's costing us a little bit over $1 million to operate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer the member's question, obviously we are in a highly competitive environment, and Radio Cayman, well, it's doing everything to maximize its sales dollars. As you know, it's a very popular radio station. We like to believe it's the most popular radio station in the Cayman Islands, and it's well subscribed, well supported by the public. And so we have a fully staffed sales team. Last year we had a shortage of staff on the sales team, so our sales team has been working on some new refined strategies to increase the revenue or to make sure we maintain the revenue figures. But we're in a highly competitive environment, and there are obviously limits, some limits in the sense that, you know, there are other radio stations who are, for instance, advertising alcohol, and Radio Cayman is not going to, well, that's not legal necessarily, and that's not something that we are going to be doing over at Radio Cayman. So there are additional revenue that, you know, we're probably not going to get. So we are going to be pushing our sales team to keep those numbers where they're at.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could make one suggestion that might help your revenue. I noticed even in today's paper, I don't have it here, there's quite a few government ads in there. Maybe we could stop putting them in the compass every day and pay Radio Cayman to broadcast them and only put it in the Compass once a month.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I think that we as a country should be grateful that we have a government radio station, while its government is still by and large and independent. And it has to be because of the law. The law says that. And it goes by that. And I think that we ought to be thankful that while we know that there is money that it don't make, but we have chosen over the years not to do certain things as a country, as a government, and therefore we have lost revenue over the years because of certain decisions that we have made as a house, and sometime coming from this house also. I remember private members' motion here that talked about no liquor advertising, and that kept us back. Well, that has taken away revenue, but suffice it to say that Radio Cayman has done an excellent job, and we have some other good stations. I mean, we even got into changes, talk show host Adam on the morning. Whereas, we go and get Radio Cayman is consistent.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. If there are no, Mr. McLean, so
Yes,
you have a
Mr.
question.
Mr. Chairman, I hear the Cabinet Secretary say that we are operating Radio Cayman in a very competitive environment. Well, I knew that when I was there too, but my instructions were to get very aggressive. And that's what we need to do. Get very aggressive. That's why I heavily invested in Radio Cayman with the truck and all that kind of stuff. Get out there on the street. Let's do it. And yeah, Mr. Chairman, I am supporting my member from Northside. Even though I say we're Siamese twins, this one we're in co-join on this thing about let's advertise it on Radio Cayman. It's time government stop advertising in the Compass because of the negative publicity that paper gives our country. Government should make a decision to stop all government advertisements on the Cayman Compass and put them on Radio Cayman. That's the premier decision. But if, God forbid, if we were on the opposite, if it was different that I was there and he was here. But my question is, the amalgamation that was recommended, that they put the TV and the radio and all of government information services under one umbrella. I know the Premier said that he's not selling Radio Cayman, but there was an additional recommendation by E&Y to amalgamate them. Is that a future objective of the government?
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Premier.
Mr. Chairman, we've had recently, just before the UK elections, we had a team come over from the UK government to look at our system of communication. That is government communication. And they were here for a week. They did various, they had various meetings with a full range of people, not just in the public service, but more broadly. And they are producing a report for our consideration. There was no charge, except we had to cover obviously the cost of their travel and the other expenses of being here. So we are awaiting that report, and as soon as we do, we intend to make the report public, and government will decide how to move forward then.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is the last output for the Premier.
No, we have, this is the last department or office under the Premier.
Yeah, can I respectfully ask him, since it looked like he's going to get away today and be on his way, can I ask him if the visit by his chief officer this morning meant that they're producing the report on the prison for us today? I mean, if he delivered it this morning, because it was supposed to be delivered, given to us.
The report on the prison.
Not a prison, fire service. I saw him in the premises this morning, so I was thinking he had them under his arm.
No, Mr. Chairman, we didn't discuss the fire service this morning. We were discussing this.
No, you promised yesterday that the report would be made available to us.
Well, I think it's not quite 12 o'clock yet, so so we're still in today.
That a game
So
you're playing.
I'll deliver on my promise.
That a game you're playing. Okay. Okay. It takes two to tango. Watch the tango.
Mr. Tibbetts, you had a comment, sir?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to give comment quickly, and I thank you very much for recognizing me. Regarding Radio Cayman, just a quick comment. And certainly I think all of us, Mr. Chair, would wish to see Radio Cayman with the ability for their revenues to increase closer towards what their expenses are. And I think that has been an ongoing effort, but there are some restrictions which I won't go into right now. But what I really wanted to say was that while that is the desired net end result, at least if it were self-sufficient, the fact that it is not, if we were to make comparisons with the services that Radio Cayman provides, that it is not paid for, both for the government and for the entire country at large. If dollar values were put to those services provided, I'm sure that it would be almost, if not quite self-sufficient, if we were comparing that as an income. So I say that so that we don't hear a bunch of people jumping on Radio Cayman saying that Radio Cayman is losing money and we shouldn't have Radio Cayman, because all we need to think of, and we can actually make slight comparison too, similar Cayman Airways situation. All we need to do is to think of emergency times in our country when our country needs the services of the likes of Cayman Airways and Radio Cayman, and people will appreciate the need for it. And I just wanted to make that point, sir.
I agree with you.
Thank
Like
you.
the fires, they don't know they need a fire service until the fire starts somewhere about.
Okay.
You bring somebody down, you tell them what to do. Don't even make them get off the plane and government want to do something, stop that.
If we could proceed to vote. So all those in favor of CBO 17, information services provided to other government agencies, $928,448, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and administration of the Premier's office, $936,525, found on page 49. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, I'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and administration of the Premier's office, $936,525. Sorry, that should be $936,525, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. CBO 21, broadcasting of public information and on-air programs, $1,102,747, found on page 5050. Are there any questions? All those in favor of CBO 21, broadcasting of public information and on-air programs for $1,102,747, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
CBO 22, services provided by the London office for $521,918, found on page 51. Are there any questions? Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, can the minister say what has been done in recruiting for a head of the office?
Mr. Chairman, I'll ask the Cabinet Secretary to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Presently, the recruitment process for the UK representative is now in a second round. Previously, the previous candidate that was selected during the first exercise, in the end, wound up declining the offer of employment for personal reasons. So they went through the entire process, got to the very end, and an individual was selected, and they were in negotiations but could not complete the negotiation, and the individual declined the offer of employment. And so we are presently in a second round of recruitment for the post. Now, as you will see, that this item has been transferred to the Cabinet Office. So to date, during the previous financial year, it was handled by the Ministry of Home Affairs. But I have a synopsis of what has transpired to date. So as of October 14, 2014, an ad was placed. A total of 12 applications were received. 9 were from Caymanians. All Caymanian applicants were invited to submit a proposal for a written proposal. And the top 3 candidates have been selected to go through to the next 3 rounds, or sorry, to the next round, and interviews are being arranged for hopefully later this month. And so I can confirm that all 3 finalists are Caymanians. All 3 finalists to be interviewed are Caymanians.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. McLean, you have a question, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I heard the phrase written proposal. Asked to submit written proposal. Can the Cabinet Secretary, through the Chief, the Premier, expound on?
Mr. Chairman, all Caymanian applicants, well, all applicants were invited to submit a proposal for a 5-year strategic business plan for the office, which was then graded.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, that begs another question. Can we expand on that? We are interviewing for a position. We're advertising for a position. The applicants are asked to do a business plan on some place they don't know anything about? Is that what we're talking about?
Mr. Chairman, this is really outside my province now. This is the civil service. But
okay.
But what has been explained to me is essentially what you're testing. It's a test. You're testing to see the level of thought, insight, vision that the individual has, because those are key leadership qualities that are necessary. If you're going to lead an organization, you have to be able to think about where the organization needs to go. It's a test.
But Mr. Chairman,
What you're after, Mr. Chairman, is trying to be able to assess the person's ability to think things through and the level of vision and insight and their thought process. Because what you're weighing up is one candidate against the other. So this is a part of the overall assessment of the individual and their abilities.
but Mr. Chairman, is this a new policy? And maybe the Premier can't answer this. Is this a new policy when hiring civil servants or senior civil? If he would like, we can hold this off until Mr. Attorney, what his name is? Deputy Governor arrives.
That's a great idea, Mr. Chairman, because that's outside my province, really.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mr. Premier. Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate it's outside his remit when it comes to hiring, especially senior civil servants. But certainly, the question I would ask the off cabinet secretary is, were they given the current budgets or how the office was run in the past to be able to do a 5-year business plan for that office?
Mr. Chair, through you, I wouldn't have those details because, again, I didn't handle the recruitment process. This has just been transferred to our ministry, to our portfolio, forgive me. But, Mr. Chair, this, again, is if I may add to what the Premier has said, this is only but a scenario. And so this is not what necessarily will be used to actually run the office, but it's just merely as a written scenario and as part of a written assessment. So it's quite commonplace in recruitment processes right now in the public service. So for instance, when I was recruited for cabinet secretary, I had to complete something quite similar, a written exercise, and this is, and after that you go on to a phase of an assessment center, etc. So.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the cabinet secretary, but he had been working in the cabinet office for a long time. I understand all that. So he was privy to information within the office and how the running of the office. But this is what I'm trying to determine. If it is about that particular office, if it's a scenario on management abilities, then that's a completely different thing. If we give them a scenario on managing an office of that level, and they do it on that basis but they don't even know who you talk to in England and how you get to, many of them get to the House of Lords or the other offices up there that or the FCO and the likes. If they're talking about managing a scenario, if you had this and you had that and you had that, how would you manage it? Then that's a different story altogether. But you can't ask them to do a 5-year business plan for the London office.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to vote on this appropriation. So all those, oh, sorry, Mr. McTaggart. Mr. McTaggart.
So, thank you, sir. Just out of curiosity, and through you to the Premier, can we say how many other staff there are in the office in London at this time?
Mr. Chairman, there are two. There is the deputy director, who is acting now as the representative, and an assistant director.
Thank you. All those in favor of CBO 22, services provided by the London office of $521,918, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, I would like the minutes to specifically record that I did not take part in the discussion and that my vote is I abstain from the vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Other executive expenses. OE 5, constituency allowance, $654,300 on page 279. Are there any questions? I recognize Mr. McTaggart. Oh, my apologies. Page 279, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if we could get a commitment that these monthly payments would be done by direct deposit at the same time that our salaries are done.
Mr. Chairman, I can't give any such commitment. That's not, again, within my province.
For those, can we do it for those who would wish it done that way?
Mr. Rose.
Mr. Chair, I will discuss it with my CFO and the treasurer to see how feasible it would be to provide some of the constituency allowance checks, by check or by direct deposit. I'm not sure how viable it would be to do two systems at the same time, so we'll have to have a discussion with the treasurer, and I would undertake to get back to the member.
Thank you. All those, if there are no further questions, all those in favor of OE 5, constituency allowance, $654,300, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. OE 96, executive salary reimbursements, $30,000, found on page 281. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Can we get an explanation for that?
I'll put OE 96, correct.
Mr. Chair, this is just an allowance that was agreed between the premier and the government upon him taking up office. It's just an allowance in lieu of how to describe it? In lieu of we don't have any yeah, it's in lieu of any additional enhancements at his home or what have you. So it's just an allowance for the premier.
All right, and Mr. Chairman, I don't have too much problem with that. This parliament knows I don't get into those things, because if we don't enhance the office of the premier, then it will have no respect in this country. And we need our children to know what that is all about. Now that that has come up, I need to know when we are going to build a resident for the premier in this country. I ain't behaving as a, what your name is, Kurt.
It's okay.
Mr. Chairman, that won't be during this term. It'll have to be when the member from East End takes over.
Well, what you need to do is build it at the end of this so we can take over from you.
Okay, gentlemen, if you could return to the vote. Mr. All those, so therefore, all those in favor of OE 96, executive salary reimbursements for 30,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. Equity investments, EI 36, Cabinet Office, $350,000, found on page 283. Are there any questions? All those in favor of EI 36, Cabinet Office, $350,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. That concludes the appropriations for the Cabinet Office and the Premier's responsibilities. We will now, I think this is a convenient time to take the luncheon break. We'll return at 1:30 p.m. and we will at that time consider the appropriations to the Minister for Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure. We will now suspend proceedings for the luncheon break.